everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm very happy to introduce you to our contributor Victoria and our guest John. They're both alums from the University of Chicago, which is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be at the beginning looking at John's journey while he was applying to the University of Chicago. Take you through the entire process of exactly what he did, from his essays to various other application components. We're then going to talk to John a little bit about life on campus at UChicago, a little bit about the major that he chose to study and what he's currently doing. Please type out any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'd be happy to address them towards the end. Victoria, John, let's get started. Shall we start with the academics, Victoria?
Yes, that sounds great. So, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about your academics in high school? I know that you went to, I believe, a community college during your senior year for math because you were at a more accelerated pace than the high school. So maybe talking a little bit about your academic choices.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I was a year ahead in math. I found out that that's not terribly uncommon, but so my senior year, I went to a community college and took Calc 3 and differential equations.
Were you able to transfer those credits?
So not really. University of Chicago doesn't have exact equivalents to those classes. Their math sequences are a little odd. You can either take like very general classes that are just supposed to cover everything in those, or you can like take like a hyper specific like math for physics or math for social science, and that's going to give you like all the pieces you know for like whatever major, all the pieces you need to know for the classes in that major. So it's bits and pieces from those two classes, but not necessarily like all of them. So there
Got it. Yeah, Chicago likes to have their own thing.
Yeah, in general, it is difficult to transfer classes over to them. Both I've heard this from transfer students as well as just AP and IB. They typically only accept fairly high scores, and they help, but they don't. Some schools you can come in and really look like a second year on your first year just because of all the credits. You can't really do that at UChicago.
Right. Got it.
Let's talk a little bit about your academic trajectory, John, from the 9th grade onwards. Obviously, you've got a GPA of 3.9. So were you amongst the top, say, 5% in your class? Because that's, something very important for our audience to understand. Because, of course, when you're looking at a school like UChicago, academics is very important, right? And there is the consistency to your academics is what colleges are also looking at. So what do you want to say about that entire journey that you've had from the 9th till, your final, your senior?
So, I think I definitely was around top 5%. We never there was a top 10% thing, and I was definitely in that. I was pretty securely in that. But they never told us exact breakdowns after that.
Right.
Some things to note about my GPA is I didn't pass fail any classes, which I know some people do. So, this includes like everything. And I chose that just because I thought it was more honest and a little more like transparent, especially since like some of my bad grades in big quotes were like A minuses. That's like not actually bad. That's actually quite good.
Yeah.
So that's like one thing. Another thing is I generally like upward trended. So like the A minuses I got were mostly first and second year, or freshman and sophomore year. I think I got one junior year, maybe two, and I think senior year also all A's. So like I think that upward trend also looks really good because if you start out with an A minus in English and end with an A in English, like you're clearly improving.
Yeah,
and
and
all
that's
that.
what colleges want to see at the end of the day, this upward graph in terms of, improvement. And that's
Mhm.
something that's always appreciated. But were there specific subjects that you chose in, say the 11th and the 12th that you took specifically because you were very clear that there is a particular major or a program that you do want to pursue?
Yeah, so I was definitely interested in like STEM in general. Obviously, I liked math and was kind of just on this easy path for that, but that didn't really have much choice. I mean, the choice to go to community college. But I made sure to take like AP
Mhm.
Chem, AP Physics my senior year as a like, hey, if I want to go do a physics major or a chemistry major or like any of those, I wasn't super into biology, so I didn't take any AP Bio. But those were definitely like choices. I was like, I want to make sure I take these. I also
Mhm.
made sure I took like non-STEM classes. I took I forgot the name for the second quarter of IB
And you
history.
took
For us, it was 20th century world topics. Um, so like that was kind of another like, oh, I want to look well-rounded.
Yeah.
I'm one also just genuinely interested in like this subject, but like it's also good to like not just take STEM all the time. Spread yourself out a little bit. And also
Yeah.
when you're spreading yourself out, take high level. Like don't just take History 101. Take like your IB or AP or whatever.
Mhm.
I love history.
You took IB French as well, correct?
Yeah. I took that all. It I took it until it got discontinued at our school. So and that was I think something I mentioned somewhere because in some of my applications because it would otherwise look a little odd. It's like why did you stop? It's like
Right.
no, it
Yeah.
literally got discontinued on me. But yeah, that was another one. I mean, I think it's important to learn other languages. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir though, because if you guys are understanding me, you speak at least two languages. Um,
Right.
but that's like an important thing for like at least I think my family kind of said this is important. And then it also looks good. Most schools require like I think Michigan as a state requires every student to take like 2 classes of a foreign language. And so
Mhm.
kind of whenever there's a requirement like that, I think it's a good sign that you should try and go above and beyond it.
Right.
Right? If there's a minimum, you don't want to be writing at the minimum. You want to be a bit above.
Yeah.
So
That's a really
Yeah.
good point.
No, absolutely. And I think to just sum up the whole academic bit, I think, like John, I mean, he's got a 3.9 GPA. And for all those of you who are watching, who are looking at applying to, UChicago or schools like UChicago, academics are very, very important. Choose your subjects wisely, choose your curriculum wisely, make sure that, you attempt to be in the top 5% in your class. That's always very, very helpful and important. John, do you just want to tell us a little bit about some of these awards that you've received that we've listed out here?
yeah,
From
I was trying to. I was having a little bit of fun because I remember when I was applying that like Common App only had like a space for like 3 awards, so I was like, okay, I don't have that many awards, but I was like, which 3 do I pick? And
Mhm.
how do I spend them? And I think these were the 3 I chose. And sorry, I don't quite remember the exact names of all of them, but I definitely picked like IB World Scholar. I wanted one that was like a global thing, and then I
Yeah.
kind of like
Mhm.
there was some for if you're in America, there's the American something mathematics exam.
Yeah.
But you have to
Yeah.
like pass the test to even take it. It's related to like sending teams out to I forgot what it's called, like the International Math Olympics, and
Yeah.
it's kind of
And
how
I
they
think
find that.
both, yeah, both
And
the
so,
the
go ahead.
Valley Math competition and the AIME test tie in very well with the fact that you wanted to pursue a major in math, right?
Yeah, they
There's
did.
that direct correlation there that you're able to showcase. I think it's also a testament to what you had said earlier about going over and above, um, you know, um, the base requirements that one has when it comes to a particular subject or a major. And I think that's something that's definitely important, where you're able to showcase this passion and for a particular subject, and you're involving yourself in a host of these activities that outside the classroom, that sort of showcase that, attest to that passion that you have. um, shall we look at your extracurriculars? Victoria, I'd like you to come in here and
Yeah,
perhaps,
absolutely.
yeah.
So we have a lot of very different things going on here, which I think is really cool because it shows like all of these different interests that John has and like how well-rounded he is. So we have some things like swim that he did 4 years, so that shows like dedication because he did it right from the beginning all the way through. And that was a really intense thing. He had to come before school for practices and after school as well.
Yeah.
We see some other things like track and cross country that shows, like, again, we see some continuous involvement in those activities. John, do you want to talk a little bit about the Lettuce Club? That was a really goofy thing that was done, but kind of like fun.
Yeah, that was a very goofy thing. So it's a like once a year club at my school, or where it's a competition to see how fast you can eat a head of lettuce.
Okay.
And whoever wins, if you're willing and also not a senior, you are required, or you're supposed to set up the next year's lettuce competition, as well as give awards out to just everyone who showed up, give them like a little locker magnet. And so there's like some actual logistical things you have to do. You have to remember this, you got to set in your calendar. You got to like, get people together next year, as well as like make these little awards.
That's really interesting. So what did your role as the president of the Lettuce Club entail? And
So
was this one of the activities that you listed out in the extracurricular section of your Common App?
So there was somewhere there was like clubs and stuff, and I did put it down just because I wasn't in that many clubs, and so I wouldn't have considered it a very big part of my application. There were things where it was like list, something, and it's like, okay, there's a small list. I need to pick the ones which look the best.
Yeah.
But whoever category I put this in, I just didn't have much there, so I was like, hey, it's okay to put in this one that might be a little weaker.
And I think it
I was
shows
very
connection
honest that
community.
yeah, and I was very honest that it was like, this is just a few hours a year, not like not a huge commitment, but I did, it requires some organization skills. It requires some like making locker magnets and keeping track of the names of the people you have to do it, like making locker magnets for. You have to make announcements, the next coming year for the competition. You gotta help, judge it, and these are all small tasks, but they have to show a level of organization that I think looks good. Obviously, if you were president, treasurer, secretary of any club, you're going to have that, and probably more, because as I said, this was a pretty low effort thing, but it still required some organization, which is what I think they're looking for when they ask you, were you the president of the club?
It's really cool that you were able to mention that. And John, this is a conversation I've had with Victoria a number of times, but more often than not, we're constantly having to explain to students that there is no checklist when it comes to your extracurricular. It's not like colleges expect you to have XYZ activities. Just because something worked for a particular student doesn't mean that it's also going to work for you. The only expectation that colleges have at the end of the day is that you're pursuing what you're passionate about, and you're talking about it. And I think it's really cool that you mentioned that you're the president of the Lettuce Club. So I think your extracurriculars, like Victoria said, very well-rounded. We've got athletics. I do see some some tutoring, and chair of the NHS cycling committee. There's music as well. You were a part of the orchestra. Was this your school orchestra? Because I also see this as an activity that you did consistently for 4 years.
Yes. So that was part of my school orchestra. We had a number of I don't know what to call them. Concerts. That's what it is. been so out of it. Where we would, but that would all take place after school. There's a level of practicing you're supposed to do after school. So even though it was kind of a school thing, I put it on some places just because it was like, no, I spent time out of class. So that kind of makes it into an extracurricular.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And tutoring, I know that's something that you tutored in math, I believe. So you were like using both math, but also helping your fellow students with their math skills. So that kind of shows that connection to community as well. And then we see a few different things coming in with like your youth group, which you also did throughout your high school career. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements of your personality that are coming through in these extracurriculars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's,
sorry. Yes, please.
I was just saying, it's like part of extracurriculars they're your choice. So I really hope you like them. They should reflect a bit of your personality.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly
absolutely. Pursue what you're interested in. Totally. And then you did this summer abroad in France as well, which is kind of an extracurricular, kind of like a summer activity. Do you want to talk about your choice to do that and your experience a little bit?
Yeah. So I wanted to do something abroad. I was a bit concerned about doing during the school year just because I kind of had a track very much probably since my sophomore year, if not for my freshman year, of like what classes I wanted to take. And I was a little concerned about like if I go spend a semester abroad, that could, everything would be thrown off. It would have been it would have been fine. But like I was concerned about that. And so I said, hey, can I do something over the summer? Did a bit of research and I found one that a small abroad experience in France and over the summer. And so I did that, I think it was my junior year, between junior and senior year.
Right. And that shows continuity also from taking French throughout high school. So then you even went to France to deepen your knowledge of the language. Great.
Okay. Super. So should we now just go on to perhaps some of your specific application components? I mean, essays, of course, we're going to tackle later, but let's start with your recommendations. So you have 2 teacher recommendations, one mathematics and the other one was your TOK mentor, I'm assuming. So do you want to talk about the entire process of first just identifying these people? Because again, recommendations are very critical to the admissions process. These are letters that attest to your your skills and your ability to succeed at college. So how is the entire process for you? How did you go about picking the referees that you did?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I tried to pick a combination of things. I tried to pick people I knew who could write well. I know I had a lot of friends who asked the physics teacher, and honestly, no offense to him, I'm not sure how good of a writer he was. It's like, he was a physics teacher, right? That wasn't an important part of his skill set for his job, but I was a little skeptical with that. So I definitely kind of tried to narrow my list to who can actually write a really good persuasive essay.
Who knows me? Yeah.
But then also who knows me and who has something good to say about me. Those are the 3 things that I was narrowing down. So, and then these 2 teachers of mine, I think, hit all those boxes. I had a really great relationship with my math teacher my junior year, and I knew he was good at writing. I knew he was also didn't have a lot of letter recommendations because he often taught senior level classes, but since I was a year ahead, I got him junior year, so kind of within time to ask for a letter. Then my TOK mentor was also very, an English teacher, so there's a check on that. Knew me quite well, and again, I think really liked me. I think it was kind of funny because I think I asked her to write a letter, and then I checked in with my letter writers, I forgot how it was, a couple months afterward, like, oh, how's it going? And she was like, oh yeah, I already wrote it. And it was like, I think it was a week after she said that it was within a week of me asking, she wrote it, which was just like, okay.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy.
She was eager. Yeah.
Yes. And that's
Excited
something
to
that's
write
very
about
fun.
you.
So looking for that. I feel like I
Yeah,
can't.
and you really
Go ahead.
sorry, continue.
All I was saying is
You really you really connected with your TOK teacher quite a bit, and that also comes into one of your essays. So that's another point where we have this like connection coming in. But go ahead and say what you were.
I mean, you're making a good point of like, I mentioned these three things, but there is a fourth of like, they should be connected to you, but hopefully that comes with it. Like, if they know you, it's because you've taken their class. So hopefully it's in something related to something you care about at least. I was saying,
sorry, I feel like we keep cutting each other off.
Go ahead.
But I think you mentioned the main pointers. Your recommends essentially came from people who were very eager to write you that letter. Your TOK teacher was a clear attestament to that, considering she did it in a week's time. So obviously she must have been very happy to write you that letter, which is great. And also people who know you well, who know what you're not just doing on school, but like on campus, but also outside, and have just seen you grow as an individual and are able to just write you a fantastic letter. They're essentially your biggest cheerleaders. So I think that's great. And do we want to delve into the whole connections bit? Because I think it's really interesting that you had all of these opportunities from your cousin who had attended UChicago to interviewing with the current student, and just being able to go on campus for the local information session, and then eventually meeting with the math undergrad director. So was that something that you had like planned? Like, were all of these things very carefully planned, or did they just sort of happen? And what did it
I really wish I had planned. These kind of just happened. I know it's like the worst answer, right? The answer should be that yes, I planned it out. So the way I even got introduced and interested in UChicago was a local talk that happened at like the town just across from mine, and like there were like 5 or 6 people at that talk. But I'm pretty sure like we wrote something that said we were there. We're like, we signed in or something. And then, I later went to actually visit campus and got a full campus tour. So like I got the talk pretty much a second time. But while I was there was like an interview thing. I think that might be discontinued now. But there used to be this like, you could meet with a current student and kind of interview about it was mostly just talk about the college, talk about what you like. Maybe they would ask you a few questions about your application. Like I think they asked me about like the National Honor Society Recycling Committee. That one always got questions. That is actually a side point. If you ever have interviews, look at your application and try and figure out what people don't immediately know what that means. You're going to get questions about it, and make sure you have a good like 20-second, 60-second pitch of why it was the coolest thing ever.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I had like all of those. And then I can't remember exactly when, but I think it might have been that same trip. I emailed with the math department being like, hey, like I have a slightly weird math thing, just because at the time I didn't know how, like what my work in community college math classes, how that was going to transfer over. And I wanted to make sure like the school was going to have a good setup for me, a good track for me. And I was like emailing the like director of undergraduate studies, and I was like, is there someone I can meet for this? And he was like, yes, me. I was like, okay, why not? And he apparently, like, I've since known him as like both a professor and he just loves meeting with students. He will make time. Like this is 100% part of his character. I didn't know that at the time. So I just walked into his class and office, and we chatted a bit about what the classes were. And I kind of learned that the UChicago math track was something that was similar, but like doesn't conform to like a standard math track. So I wasn't going to be repeating much material, which was really great news for me. I wanted to, take something that was going to be interesting. I wanted to learn, but not.
I think
not be redundant.
What's definitely noteworthy here, especially with this meeting with the math undergrad director, is that while this wasn't something that you planned, you take the initiative to, reach out to him. And also that there was a genuine question that you had. I feel like a lot of students struggle. They do reach out to, professors at some of the schools that they're looking at, but it's just it's most of the time they just end up introducing themselves and there's no response that they get. And what one actually needs to do is talk about something that they could actually help them with, perhaps, and then take it on from there. So yeah, I think super cool. Okay, so for all those of you who are watching, John was very kind to share both his essays that he had submitted to UChicago, and we're going to go over to that bit now. Victoria, do you just want to tell us a little bit about the reputation that UChicago has garnered over the last couple of years with regard to the essay prompts, and why it's just so jarring for people?
Yeah, absolutely. UChicago has this reputation for having these really difficult and really quirky essay questions. So this first one that we see on screen here is, I believe every year they have this question. They had it when John was applying, and they still have it to this day. So that shows at least the past 4 years. So this one isn't so different from the other questions that you'll see, like why this school. But I think the thing with this specific question that you want to look at is UChicago is really looking for students that are aligned with their ideals. So they want to see your quirks. They want to see what you're really passionate about, and they want to see that coming through in a very genuine way. So I think really emphasizing that in this prompt is going to be an excellent way to approach it. The other question is an optional question, and I think they typically have about 5 or 6 that you can choose from. And these are where the questions really start to get funny. And the way that they bring these questions in is they ask their current students to write a question that would interest them or that they would be interested in answering. And then they select from the responses that they receive. I think they receive hundreds of responses from students. So that also shows like how the community, the students, they take the time to submit these questions because they have these values too. Like they also are curious and interested and want to answer these quirky questions. So I think looking through, like some of them, I read them and I'm like, I wouldn't have any idea how to approach this question. Yeah. And then others, it's like, okay, this one, I think I can think about something for this. So, looking at those questions and knowing like you can let some of them go, like don't worry too much about it, and then see from your options which ones, like, did something come to you? And don't take it too seriously. I think that's another point about this is like you're really supposed to be showing like kind of the way that your mind works, the way that you approach these questions, but it's not that they're looking for a specific response. In fact, I think that they'd be happier to see something unexpected than to see something kind of expected as a response to those. So we can go ahead and take a look at John's response to this first sort of why UChicago question. And I think what really stood out to Isha and myself when we read through this is that John's voice is really strong here. Of course, I know John personally, but I think even someone who doesn't know him can tell that this is such a genuine voice. This is really who he is. And, even just from that very first line, it's a kind of funky entrance. He says, when most people hear the term mathematics in my town, they think of what engineers do, and it irks me. okay, drawn in. That's kind of a funny thing to say initially. And then John makes this claim that he views mathematics as a member of the liberal arts. And I'm like, wow, that's super fascinating. I've never heard that claim before. And I'm really curious about what about math is liberal arts to him. He goes in and he talks about like knowing that UChicago has a strong mathematics program, but what he's really interested in is how they are a liberal arts community. So he'll be able to engage with all these different disciplines and then bring them into his study of mathematics. So expand his ability to view mathematics by taking English classes, by engaging with the humanities. And then he talks about that through acknowledging his TOK class, which was a really important class for John, I believe. It was something that really just changed his way of thinking and broadened his scope. And he talks about that. One thing that I loved from this was when he went into discussing, so through our TOK class, we went to the Alden B. Dow home in our city, which was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright. So someone famous, someone also connected to UChicago because there's a Frank Lloyd Wright home on campus. And then he talks about what they discussed within this home. And it was really cool because he said, I get to look at walls which aren't made of squares or rectangles, but instead rhombuses, and hold discussions about why our world values 90-degree edges, or the differences of breaking the tradition, or the difficulties of breaking the tradition of thousands of years. So this really relates back to his idea of looking at things from a different perspective, using knowledge from all areas of life and applying them to your field of study. So these are super interesting things to bring into a paper. And then I think finally, what really intrigued me about his approach to this prompt is at the very end, he talks about when he interviewed with the university, he saw all of these different students coming in with their mothers and like kind of being quizzed on all these different questions. Whereas John was sitting there and he had his own questions scribbled onto a piece of paper ready to ask the person he was interviewing with his questions. So John was actually coming in with questions of his own and seeing if UChicago was the fit for him. Are we still here? Okay. So I think that those are some elements of your essay, John, that were really interesting. And I'm curious, is this essay something that was really specific to UChicago for you, or did you use some of these same elements within your essays that you did for other schools as well?
I think I wrote this essay pretty early on. So I think it did influence later essays. I think I definitely mentioned sort of the more mix of liberal artsy kind of feel. It definitely depended on the school, because like I only can really write that to certain schools that like actually fit that. Like I can't say, hey, I want a liberal arts education at your non-liberal arts school. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
So
totally.
You can't even scrap that to other places. But some of these ideas I think I definitely took to other places. I don't think anything was quite this, but I think there were definitely like, sections of this that I was like, hey, I want to talk about, why I took IB in other places. That was, something I wanted to talk about. Like there was part of this essay was I wanted to explain my transcript. I wanted to answer the questions I think people had. And I think one of the questions was like, why did you like have to do the IB program and like have to do the AP program? And it was like, well, I just wasn't really IB, but I took these classes that I thought were important. And so I did want to kind of explain that. And I think I tried to do a similar thing in other circumstances. Not obviously, sometimes you can't fit it into every essay prompt. So I think that showed up a bunch. But some of these things I think were just, I mean, like the thing about the questions, I don't think ever, it wasn't true about other schools. So
right, exactly. Yeah, totally. I think too, the thing that really stands out here is just your true eagerness to learn and to change your way of viewing things. So that's something that really impressed me, and I think also really aligns with UChicago and their ideals. So this was a great take for this essay. Yeah, I loved this one.
I think I just have to add in, I think my favorite line in this essay is, when I look at University of Chicago, I see a ton of nerds like myself having fun nerding out and inventing their own ways to learn. I think this is
Yeah.
yeah, it's just so cool that you were able to write that. And it, yeah, like Victoria said, it's just such a genuine essay, and anyone who reads it can really tell that, John, you're super excited about just being on campus. And yeah,
Totally.
okay, so I'm going
Right.
to go on to the second prompt. So, like Victoria mentioned earlier, this is optional, and you have 6 prompts that you can pick, and these are the first 3. We'll let you quickly go through them. Very
Right.
interesting.
So these are
You answer, what advice would a wisdom tooth have?
right. Like these are 3, the first 3 from this year that are included. And I think it's cool too that they include who
I know.
proposed
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
this prompt. It's cool. What advice would a wisdom tooth have? That's an example of a prompt that I don't know even how to begin with that one, but maybe someone reads that and they do. Like they have a specific story that this makes them think of. Well, I actually lost my wisdom teeth and I learned this in the process, or like potentially turning this into like a weird little story where you are a wisdom tooth and you're telling the story of like the inside of the mouth. I don't know. But like approaching these from, like we were saying, like not taking them too seriously, getting quirky, getting weird with them, allowing them to be sort of expansive. Third one. Okay, this one was cool. So this is you're on an expedition to found a colony on Mars. And then you see these Martians. So they're eager to communicate, but they're impatient and demand that you represent the human race in one song, image, memory, proof, or other idea. What do you share with them to show that humanity is worth their time? So you kind of have to think now about, yeah, this is a really cool question, I think, because it shows like to you, what would you say is like the most important or like interesting thing about our race? And your answer will ultimately show a lot about who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be
So I
able
think
to do it in the
these
form of a song, an image, memory, proof, or any other idea is so very interesting.
Yeah, I think I
the
know.
idea of a proof too is interesting.
I think I know
Yeah.
Alex, and I think he's a math person.
Oh,
If
you do?
I don't. Last names are hard, but I think I might know this person. In which case, I'm not surprised proof is on there as like a math person. Just throw that in.
Yeah, I
That'd be
think
a hard
that's
one.
funny too. Like the idea that you could show a proof to show the worth of humanity to these Martians. Yeah, so kind of with these prompts, if you are looking into these prompts, you can think about them with friends, bring them into your family discussions, and like have a funky conversation about them. I know John and I had some of the weirdest conversations of our lives at our dinner table with our family, where we would get out the dictionary and debate the meaning of words. And so like bring this into a space of people that you can kind of come up with these weird, expansive, but also like interesting ideas that are going to show something about who you are and how you approach the world. And
Absolutely. These are the other 3 prompts that we have this year's admission cycle. And
Genghis Khan with an F1 race car. Yeah, so really just these prompts, take them with a laugh and then really let them
just have fun with it.
Yeah. These
Yeah.
prompts are really just inviting you to have fun. And I would say, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that these prompts really represent like the types of things that UChicago students like to talk about amongst each other. Like you had a ton of weird conversations like this with your friends
Yeah,
at
I mean, I
UChicago.
can totally see that some of these things was totally like someone just had a conversation with their friends, and
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, I think option 5 is like very clearly, you just had a conversation with your friends about probably this very topic and went, that'd be a good essay prompt, and decided to put it, like, send it in, see what happens. Lo and behold, now it's
Yeah.
here.
That's very cool. Okay, so
Yeah. So I
let's
think like,
take a closer look at John's essay. And John, do you want to tell us why is it that you picked the prompt that it did and the entire process of writing this particular essay, and why you chose to go with the topic that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I like read through the prompts, and this was the one that I, first day had an idea for, but I kind of said, okay, I'm gonna sleep on it. I'm gonna think about other ones. I came up with ideas for other ones. I just, at the end of the day, I didn't like them as much. And so that was
yeah.
one kind of like, what was the idea that what was the essay I wanted to write? And I think this was it. I was trying to do a few things. I wanted to just have an essay where I could talk about myself. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to also be unique. That was one that you want to have an essay that stands out. And this one was an odd essay. If you read it, so the prompt is about saying what is something that's quirky or like a little
So
odd,
bad.
but that makes them better.
Yeah.
Or that makes it better. So there's like Vinyl with the scratching, or Sharknado is so bad that it's good.
Yeah.
Well, I had this really great friend who is a bit of an oddball, and it's I think why we're such good friends. And so I think that was just an odd application to say, what's the weird thing that I like? What is so odd? It's like, what's so bad that it's good is like one of my best friends, which is an interesting thing to say. It's definitely an odd way to answer this. But also, when I was thinking about that, I was like, that's going to be a hard essay. Because I need to talk about my friend. Like, that is the topic of the essay. So I need to have
Yeah.
that say something about me.
Right.
Because
And I think that it really did.
Yeah.
And I think being able to pull that off was really good. Right? Like I didn't shy
Yeah.
away from the more risky essay idea.
And also how you tie in the
Right.
math angle as well is
Yeah.
very interesting for me, where you go into this
Mm-hmm.
talk about this mathematical concept that your friend created, and how you guys like had these conversations. And it's I can actually imagine this happening in front of me.
Right. I think that really stuck out to me too, because, well, reading this like mathematical concept that you and your friend introduced, I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea what you're talking about. But I knew that this would make sense to someone who had an understanding of math. And that this is the type of conversations that you would want to see happening in an undergraduate community.
Yeah.
These kind of like weird discussions that both like speak to our personalities and our interests, but also are connecting back to what we're studying, because ultimately that's our interest. We're most interested in what we're studying, hopefully. So bringing that in this kind of really weird and quirky way, but showing how that was an expansive conversation, or they were always expansive conversations that you were having with this friend. Really united a bunch of really key points. I think your love for math, your ability to have these really funny and interesting conversations that I can't even have, I couldn't have even thought about this, so this shows like how specific to you. Yeah, I loved this bit. I think also like multiple places you mentioned like being a huge nerd, which I
Yeah.
think was a funny approach too, which like it was cool though because you were showing that this is some a characteristic of yourself that you love, and that you feed through knowledge and your friendships.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can go on to the next bit, which is about John, your life on campus. So, do you want to start a little bit by telling us about the major that you did for and what you ended up, eventually doing, and what was life like on campus? And like Victoria, please come in as well, because
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I ended up with a math major. If you can't tell that I like math now, I don't know, we've been doing it for the last 45 minutes. But so that's where I ended up. Um, so I took a lot of math classes. That was probably a through line throughout my experience. But one thing is, you're forced to not take everything in math classes because you have like the core,
Mm-hmm.
which will help you. You're going to take kind of like very much English type classes. You're going to read classical literature about like
Mm-hmm.
people thinking about whatever. Um, so you're going to have to get that at some level. I took a bit extra. I had fun kind of picking my electives. I think one thing that's so cool about UChicago is it's very easy to take electives in other subject fields. You just can, and a lot of people just do. So one of the things I took a lot of my electives in was in history of science. I just thought it was kind of fun, and
Yeah.
it was a good mix between the kind of humanities as well as some things that were relevant to me. But I was taking that. I took classes with like actual history of science people who were like later. Some of them were planning on doing a PhD after this in that same field. And so it's very cool that like I was able to take like very real classes like that.
Yeah.
I also took a
You
lot of
also
physics.
took
Sorry, go ahead.
You also took a cool class about Tolkien, I believe,
Yeah,
reading like The Lord of the
there's
Rings.
a class about every 3 years taught about Tolkien and a lot about him. It's not focused on the Lord of the Rings, but it is very much a kind of comprehensive about his works. It's also not an easy class. It sounds like an easy A. It isn't, but it's taught by a professor who really knows the subject incredibly well.
Mhm.
And it's just a fun class. There are a bunch of classes like that, which are kind of fun classes.
Yeah.
There's one that's really well known that's called Star Wars and Religion. And it talks about like theories of religion and how they show up in Star Wars. I think it's in the religious studies department. That one's very well known. But there are other. I'm trying to think of other like weird classes. There's like an Italian Renaissance class, which is supposed to be absolutely excellent. And the thing that's kind of weird about that one is they dress up at the end of the year as a final project.
oh wow.
And it has some through line with what they're learning, but it has to do with like papal elections that they do like a mock papal election. So there are a bunch of like really cool electives you can take if that's your interest. But also you can take very serious, like as I said, it's like take a history
Totally.
like
There's a great
history science class, or
Yeah,
yeah.
I would say that's definitely what drew me to UChicago over. I was choosing between doing the master's program at UChicago and doing a PhD at UCSB, and I chose UChicago because the classes really drew me in. Like reading about the different class options, I was just so eager to take those classes that was why I made that choice. But I think you were about to speak about your physics
Yeah,
courses.
I minored in physics, and it was really nice that I could do that. It fit very well with the rest of my schedule. Um, And that's another thing of like you can minor very easily. I know many people who had double majors, an extra minor. I knew people who had 2 extra minors. I nearly had a second extra minor in history of science. I didn't quite finish it, but that was just because there were other classes I wanted to take. And senior year, there weren't very good classes offered that, at least to me. And so I said, hey, who cares?
Yeah, choosing the over getting a minor in something. Yeah. Cool. Very cool. So UChicago is known for being a really rigorous school. So would you say your transition from high school, was that difficult? What did it look like? And did you feel supported by the UChicago community and resources?
Yeah, yes. We are the place where fun comes to die, right? We got to mention it more. So yeah, like it is a school that can be really hard. I got like a B- in one of my first classes. There was an English class that I was not ready for. Just in the kinds of essays I wrote in high school, that essay quality was not up to college level, and there was a learning curve there.
Right.
So, but the next semester I got an A- in the second quarter of that same class. They had in all the first year writing classes, the humanities classes you have to take. There are like people, I forgot what they call them, but they're pretty much like a TA for you for that class. And they're just there to help you learn to write college essays. There's also like a particular writing center, I think a general one, as well as one for people who where English is a second language, because that can be hard of like, oh, I can write I can write really good essays in whatever my native language is, but now I need to write really good essays in English. That can be tough.
Yep.
And so there are resources for that. I didn't, obviously I didn't take myself to those, but I definitely took myself to some of those ones that were like, okay, let's do college writing now. How do we do that? So that was definitely a resource something I struggled with, and a resource that was able to help me there. Another thing that really helped me was, so the dorm system is we have like houses, and they're fairly tight knit. And that community, I think, also really helps. Just because you come in with friends, like, you already know some people, but also your houses are cross major. So you can find people who are really good at the things you're really bad at and ask them for advice, talk to them about things. I never had any of them at my essays, but I know sometimes people would like essay swap within the dorms just because it's a great thing to do. Especially if you happen to have someone in your dorm who also is in your class, that's like an instant friendship, and an instant like work buddy. So things like that were also really important.
Yeah, and you chose to live in that residential house beyond just the required time. So what made you choose to continue living on campus?
Yeah, so things have changed so I think when I was there, it was required 1 year. Often people chose to go to 2. I did for 3. Now I think it's required for 2, and I don't know what the odds are of 3 and 4. So I chose to stay in because it was a great resource. One, as I said, like you get a bunch of friends, and that's just nice. There are a bunch of resources out there just to help you have like a good community, because you can really get bogged down at work. There is a lot of work. You're going to be working a lot of the week, but it's nice to be like, oh, there's an activity this Wednesday. I'm going to make time for it. I'm going to get ahead on my work. Like, give you a reason to get ahead on your work so you can have fun is super important.
Yeah.
I also took various positions within the house. I did things with, so you do all of your intramural sports in their house. So I was the intramural sports coordinator for a little over a year.
Oh, cool.
COVID, I was interim coordinator because no one else took the job, while I was also treasurer that year. So I was doing a little extra. But I took a role in that just because the house gave so much to me. I wanted to give back, and I wanted to be involved in those things.
Yeah. Really cool.
A great safety net of friends.
Yeah, awesome. What about professors? Did you find them approachable? Were you able, like, how did you build your relationships with various professors?
Yeah. And this is also super important. Like, I know you guys are currently looking into college, but whatever you're doing after college, it's not unlikely that you might want a letter of rec from a professor if you're going to go into a lab with
Right.
bio or something, or if you're going to a PhD program. There are some things where you're going to want, or like any sort of business school, law school, you're probably going to want these letters of rec. So it is really important. What is the way you make relationships with professors? In UChicago, I think it's easier than some. And the reason I say that is class sizes are legitimately smaller for most classes. I will say there's some
Yeah.
physics and chemistry and bio, like those first classes, like the intro classes, and even sometimes like your organic chem, so like your first, second year, like standard, everyone related to chemistry has to take organic chemistry, so you're getting giant lecture halls. But towards the end, once you start getting specialized classes, you see 20, 30 person classrooms. So all of a sudden, office hours, there are only like a handful of people showing up. The professor can learn your name. If you're active in class, they're going to learn your name. So it's
Totally. And if it
you're
is
in
a
those
big
classes,
class, you can
go
always
ahead.
go to office hours. I think that's a great resource that students often forget about, or maybe they
Oh
just
yeah.
get really busy and don't prioritize it. But, going to office hours is a great way to develop a personal connection with your professors and get to know them. And like John said, it's really nice to be able to forge those relationships so that if you need a letter of rec later on, you can talk to them and they will know you personally and your abilities. So that's a great way to go about that.
Yeah, and circling back to the previous question about resources, office hours and TA office hours are very much underused resources. I
Yeah.
highly recommend that if you're in a class, if you're taking, especially if you're taking some science class where you can get like lost in the group because there are 100 people in the class, go to either your TA or your professor or both office hours because they're there to help you. Professor office hours for big classes can sometimes get really busy, and TA office hours can be like one-on-one, two-on-one,
Yeah.
and you can learn a ton from these grad students who know what they're doing and are there to help you. So use those resources.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think we'll be moving on to taking some questions from the audience. So if you have questions for John about anything related to Chicago academics, the application process, or life on campus, go ahead and type them right into the chat and we'll address those. In the meantime, while we're waiting for those to roll in, John, how would you describe the values that UChicago holds? What values did
Oh,
you?
yeah. So there's definitely we're a very rigorous school. We like academic, we like theory, we like academic thought in like a very pure form. That
Like
shows up a
the mind.
lot. Life of the mind is what we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't show up everywhere. There are exceptions, but it is something that is like very legitimate about like this is the way the classes are structured. I think it's really excellent for anyone who's like, I don't just want to like, I just don't want to just learn this to learn it. I want to like actually learn it. Like I want to have a deep understanding of insert subject here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know one of the things about like our CS major is it's not just programming. We want to teach you like how to like lead programming, how programming's actually. It's not just how do I write an efficient code to do program X. It's like no, let's talk about some of the theory. And so that will like annoy some people who are just like I just want to be able to write a program that does the thing that I want it to do. And no, we're very much like. But why? What makes this work? How can we make it more efficient? What's the limit of its efficiency? These kind of things are very common. So that's like a huge, I think,
Definitely.
I think we send
Cool.
a lot of people. I say a lot. I think more than other schools to like master's and doctorate programs, And I think we really do tee people up for those with just the amount of theory we do.
Yeah.
That I know people who have transitioned, and my personal transition to like a PhD program has been extremely smooth just because I'm used to doing theory. I'm kind of already used to this mode of learning that not every
Yeah.
school talks about.
Right. And I think that the theory applies to also like with English. When I came in, I don't think my undergraduate experience was very theory heavy. So then doing the master's, I got to know theory really well, and I think it prepared me now to go on to PhD programs. So I definitely think that that's something that UChicago is interested in throughout all of its disciplines. So a question that just came in, did you only apply to UChicago? And if not, how did you end up zeroing in on UChicago, choosing it over the other schools?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent question. So UChicago was one of my top choices early on, and that I think I just really had some really great like when I learned about them with like that like various information sessions, I was like, wow, this sounds really awesome. Really hit some nails on the head for what I wanted, but you know, I was interested in a place that had a good math program. They had a good math program. I really was looking for a place that wasn't just a math school, a math science school.
Yeah.
And I thought they blew that out of the park. As I said, like as my essays were like, I wasn't lying in my essays. So like when I went there, I legitimately could see myself in the students. And that's something I think is really important because as a student, I saw that there are in general two types of people at UChicago. There are those who chose UChicago because they like learned about it and it's this really cool environment, you know, a bunch of, you know,
That they
quirky,
felt
you know,
related
theory
to. Yeah.
people. And then there are people who are like, well, we got number whatever on US News and World Report. They're a really good school. They're the best school I got into. And the second class often struggle. I think there is like, if you're just there to get a degree, you're not going to have as much fun. I think that's general about any college, probably. That if you're just there to get like college is supposed to be a fun time. You're supposed to be learning a ton, but you're not burning yourself out is really important. And so make sure you're at a school that you can have a good time and not burn out. That's really important.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I definitely have heard about students going to Chicago just because it's a really great school and they wanted to have that name on their, CV. And yeah, like you said, that usually ends up in a struggle because it's not so true to, like, not so genuine, like you were talking about. Awesome, John. Thank you so much for everything that you've contributed today. Is there anything that's pressing that you wanted to share or any final advice for applicants to UChicago?
Oh, I feel like you should say something smart, but I mean,
Just be true to yourself, I think, is a big one.
no, I think you should. One of the things I think I've learned is what academics are great, but what you're also doing outside of academics matters just as much. You need to actually have good coping mechanisms. Like studying is hard. You need to be able to do something afterward to recharge yourself. Some people that's sitting down and reading a book. Some people that's going out and doing intramural sports with your house. That was what it was for me. I'm very much like I like doing the active things, I like doing the social things. So that was what I did. You need to find that. You need to find wherever you're going to school. You need to find that niche, and then hopefully you can find a school that hits that well for you, because you don't want to have to be like searching really hard to find that community that will like help you. And that's
an
just a general advice about everywhere. You want to make it so it's easy, but even so, when you get there, you want to find a community to support you because it'll make everything else in your life easier.
Absolutely. And I think as you're applying now to schools, actually like incorporating that rest time and that recharge time, like John said, however you recharge, making sure that that's coming in when you're working on your applications. It'll help you in the long run. If you're stumped on your essay, like you might have an idea come to you during that recharge time too. So making sure to tend to your mental well-being at the same time as pursuing your academics rigorously.
Yeah, you can
Really
look at
great, John.
clubs. Most schools have public club, forums. If you're like, I don't know how to relate, I don't know how to say why UChicago, I don't know how to say why insert school name here. Look at the clubs. See if there's one that really interests you. There you go. That's a paragraph.
Think about the communities you would want to join when you're there. Yeah, absolutely. And now John is pursuing his PhD at UCLA thanks to his experience at UChicago. He had some professors at UChicago that were able to help him and recommend him for that position. And now he's pursuing even deeper mathematical study at UCLA. So definitely a great time at UChicago.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us so early in LA. We hope you have a great Saturday, and thanks for all of your knowledge and guidance.
Thank you.
All right.